Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So, we are on the section in Sharh al-Aqaid where the author is going to describe what the universe is constituted of. So, the reason why he is doing this is because he is presenting an argument for the existence of God. He's going to show that the fact that the universe began to exist is evidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. Now, in order to show that the universe began to exist, he's going to break the universe down into its constituent parts and show that each of its parts began to exist, therefore the universe as a whole began to exist. So that's his line of reasoning, that's the direction in which he's going. So he's going to talk about what the Mutakallimun believed the universe was composed of, and he's going to talk about what the Falasifa believed that the universe was composed of. And today we have another theory of what the universe is composed of. So the Falasifa, we saw this in the last class, they believed that the universe was composed of something called matter. Matter was infinitely divisible, without end, sometimes also called hayal or hayula in Arabic. We learned that it was called al-madda. You have al-madda, which is matter, and there's a form, something called a surah. There's something called surah jismiya and surah naw'iyya. And so when this form inheres, when there's hulul of this form in the matter, then through this hulul, we have a physical object, which is a jism. So physical objects, according to the Falasifa, come from the inhering of form in matter. There's various kinds of form, and matter is infinitely divisible. Then the Falasifa, they also believed in non-physical objects. We saw in the last class that this was the aql and the ruh. And so non-physical objects are called al-mujarradat. And a non-physical object is something that doesn't have a location. A physical object is something that has a location in space. So the Falasifa, they believed that there are things in the universe that don't occupy space. And there are other things in the universe that do occupy space. And they believed that the soul did not occupy space. The Mutakallimun, they believed that the universe was only composed of physical objects. So most of the Mutakallimun, they did not believe in mujarradat, and they said that the soul is not a jawhar mujarrad. They said it's something that occupies space, and that it inheres in the body, and just like water inheres maybe not the best word, but it fills the body, just as the water fills a green stalk. And it was so. The fact that it's a physical object doesn't mean that it's solid. So they believed it was ghostly, in that you could put your hand through it and it would come out on the other side. This is what they mean by latif. But it had a location. So most of the Mutakallimun, they denied the existence of non-physical objects in the universe. This is not a point of aqidah, however. This is a point of natural philosophy, or a point of science, we would call it now. They said there's no evidence to indicate that such things exist, and so we're going to assume that they don't exist. Did they say it's impossible for them to exist? They didn't say it was impossible for them to exist. And there were some Ash'aris who did believe in the existence of mujarradat, amongst them most prominently Al-Imam al-Ghazali, and many of the Sufis, they believed, like the Falasifa, that the soul is a jawhar mujarrad. It does not have a location. This has nothing to do with aqidah, because as long as somebody believes that non-physical things, mujarradat, are contingent things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, there's no problem in believing in them. It's just a question of reality. Do they really exist or do they not exist? So the Mutakallimun, they denied the existence of non-physical objects, and they said that the universe is not composed of infinitely divisible matter in which form inheres, but they said it's composed of Ajsam, note here, jism, it's the same word. But with the Mutakallimun, a jism is a composite object. It's an object, a physical object that occupies space, and it's composed of simple objects or particles. Maybe you could call them particles, called jawhar. And composite objects are not infinitely divisible. They are only divisible up to a point. And these things, they're called them jawahir. The Greeks, they call them atoms. That's where our modern word atom comes from. We're going to discuss this in more detail in the next lesson. But for now, I just want you to see that the universe according to the Mutakallimun is different from the universe according to the Falasifa. According to the Mutakallimun, there's composite objects, simple objects that compose them, and these things, they have properties, a'rad. And these properties in here, or subsist, probably that's a better word, they subsist in or through the objects. This is the universe according to the Mutakallimun. We no longer think of the universe in this way. That's why with someone with a science education, they come and they read what the Mutakallimun are saying about the universe. It seems very foreign. How do we conceive of the universe? We conceive of the universe as composed of matter, and matter is composed of atoms, and there's subatomic particles, and there's subatomic particles. So matter is composed of atoms or particles, and we also believe that in the universe there's something called energy. Energy is fields, electromagnetic fields, waves. And matter and energy, according to Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, can be converted from one to another. Although people have debated about the philosophical meaning of, or the metaphysical meaning of E equals mc squared, but most people, most scientists, they'll tell you that that matter and energy are two different things, and they can be transformed into one another. So this energy thing is something completely different. It doesn't exist as a category in the universe according to the Mutakallimun, nor in the universe according to the Falasifa. The scientists, we also believe in our times that the universe is composed of space and time. What is space? What is time? Is it a thing? Many people will now believe, many scientists will believe that they're actual things, that space is something, time is something. These things, space and time, are not there as part of the universe according to the Mutakallimun. According to the Mutakallimun, space is something, it's just a construct of the mind. The only things that exist are physical objects, and space doesn't exist. There's no such thing as space. So most Mutakallimun denied that there was such a thing as space. I'm not sure whether this was because they believed whether or not this returns to the concept of a vacuum, because there was also a discussion in the Western world about the possibility of a vacuum, and many scientists and philosophers, Descartes for example, he believed that the universe is completely full of matter, and there's no empty space. But later on, people came to believe that there is such a thing as a vacuum. But now there's other issues, because vacuum has energy. Vacuum doesn't have zero energy, and it's related to the expansion of the universe. This is what dark energy is. So things get complicated, but at a simple level, the universe is composed of matter, energy, space, and time. And there's debates about all of these things. As in modern philosophy, there's debates about everything. So we're not going to say what exactly, we're going to suffice ourselves by looking at the universe according to the scientists at a high level. And we just want to understand that the way that we look at the universe today is different than what we find in the books of Kalam. And what we are reading today in this lesson, and also in the next lesson, and also in the next lesson, in Sharh al-Aqa'id, all of these things, they aren't about Aqidah. They are the science of the time. And we'll make some observations about why what the various evidences are, and why scientists now believe that the universe is different. Scientists have now have access to lines of reasoning that the Mutakallimun and the Falasifa did not have access to, and that should affect the way that we look at the universe. And even though the picture that we get is a very puzzling picture. So keep that in mind. So when we're going back now, we're going to see what he is saying, and we're going to see what he says about the universe, and it's composed of a'yan and a'rad. A'yan are objects, whether composite or simple, and so he's going to define them. So we can just look at those definitions and we just step back a little bit, meaning that we don't have to understand those definitions and believe that they're true. That's not part of our aqidah. We just want to step back and see this is how the Mutakallimun understood the universe to be, and we don't want to get into all of the debates in the sharh and the hashiyah and the hawashi on the hashiyah, and is it like this or is it like that, and why did the Mu'tazila say that a physical object needs to have at least so many atoms, and somebody else said it needs to have this many atoms. These debates are not relevant to studying aqidah in our time. We just need to understand them at a distance. So let's go back and see what he says. So he says that ثم أشار Imam التفتزاني, he said ثم أشار إلى دليل حدوث العالم بقوله إذ هو. So what is he going to do? He's going to give a commentary on the aqaid of Imam al-Nasafi. Imam al-Nasafi, he says إذ هو. This is what's id, since he just said al-alamu bijami'i ajza'ihi muhdas. The universe is completely muhdas, and it began to exist. It bijami'i ajza'ihi. What are those ajza? He says id huwa a'yan wa a'rad. These are the ajza of the universe according to the Mutakallimun. He says id huwa ay al-alam a'yanun wa a'rad. So he's saying that the alam is muhdas because it's a'yan and a'rad. He says, Imam al-Taftazani, that in this there's an ishara, there's an indication to the dalil for the fact that the universe began to exist, and he fills it in. So he tells you, he says إذ هو أي العالم أعيان وأعراض. أعيان means objects, whether composite or simple, and a'rad means properties. He says لِأَنَّهُ. So he's telling you what the dalil is. He says لِأَنَّهُ. Actually, no, it's not telling you. Dalil will come here. لِأَنَّهُ. Right. So the way that this looks is هو أعيان وأعراض. This is the minor premise. Okay, so this is the minor premise. Taftazani is turning this into the minor premise. So he's saying that al-alamu a'yanun wa a'rad. And then he's going to give you the major premise. Where's the major premise? He says wa kullun minhuma hadith. This is the major premise. So al-alamu a'yanun wa a'rad wa kullun minhuma hadith. Therefore al-alamu hadith. So he says that when in the aqaid he says that إذ العالم بجميع أجزائه محدث إذ هو أعيان وأعراض. He gives the minor premise. He doesn't give you the major premise, so he fills it in. He says that إذ هو أي العالم أعيان وأعراض لأنه إن قام بذاته فعين وإلا فعرض. ما قام بذاته, it means that it independently exists. وإلا, it doesn't independently exist. It exists. It has a subordinate existence. We'll explain that shortly. He says وإلا فعرض وكل منهما حادث. He says lima sanubayyin. So why are they hadith? Because he says that we're going to explain it shortly. We're going to explain it in a little while why the a'yan and a'rad are hadith, and he's telling you why he's describing what the a'yan are, whether they're composed or non-composed, and what are the a'rad. The reason why he's describing all of these things is he is setting up the argument. His argument for the fact that the universe began to exist is going to be based on what the universe is. So what the universe is composed of. He says, وَلَمْ يَتَعَرَّضْ لَهُ الْمُصَنِّفِ. This meme sad means musannif. Lahu, to what? What does this lahu return to? This lahu returns to the major premise. The major premise and its evidence. So both the major premise and the evidence of the major premise, Taftazani is going to give in his Sharh al-Aqa'id. It's not there in the matan. The matan simply has an ishara. It says that al-alamu bi jami'i ajza'ihi hadith idh huwa a'yanun wa a'rad. And he doesn't mention the major premise that both of them are hadith, and he doesn't give you the evidence for their huduth. He says وَلَمْ يَتَعَرَّضْ لَهُ الْمُصَنِّفِ. Why? لِأَنَّ الْكَلَامَ فِيهِ طَوِيلٌ. Because there's the discussion on it is long. لا يليق بهذا المختصر. It doesn't befit this mukhtasar, yani, which is Sharh al-Aqa'id. He says كيف وهو مقصور على المسائل دون الدلائل. How could that be when in al-Aqa'id al-Nasafiyya he just gives you masail, he doesn't give you their evidences. The evidences, they are supposed to be explained by the one who is explaining the matan, and that's the role of Imam at-Taftazani. So after explaining why he is doing this, why he's dividing the universe into this, he explains what is a'ayn and what is a'rad. So he says, فَالْأَعْيَانِ مَا لَهُ قِيَامٌ بِذَاتِهِ. Al-a'yan ma. What does ma? He says ay mumkin. Mumkin. So he says that when he is dividing the alam. Okay? So ma, what does ma mean? Ma means ash-shay. Al-a'yan is something. There's a famous discussion in the books of Aqidah that can you say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a thing? And the answer is yes, because ash-shay'u huwa al-mawjood. Anything that exists can be called a thing. But that's a separate discussion. Over here, what he means by thing is contingent things, things in the universe. فَالْأَعْيَانِ. Why? How do we know that? We know that because he says that al-alamu muhdis. Why? Because it's a'yan and a'rad. So he's talking about the alam. So al-a'yan is that which, yani mumkin, yakunu lahu qiyamun bidhatihi. Lahu qiyamun bidhatihi. Qiyamun bidhatihi. I'll explain that in a second. Let's look at what he says in the commentary. He says biqarinati. What is he saying biqarinati? He is explaining why he explained why he said that ma is mumkin. Why did he say that what is intended by ma is mumkin? He says biqarinati ja'lihi. Biqarinati ja'lihi. There's a missing word here. Biqarinati ja'lihi min aqsamil alam. We know that it's mumkin because of the hint that it was made to be part of the alam, and the alam is all mumkin. Therefore, we know that ma here refers to the mumkinat. Then he says, what does qiyam bidhatihi mean? What does it mean for something to have qiyam bidhatihi? He says, وَمَعْنَى قِيَامِهِ بِذَاتِهِ عِنْدَ الْمُتَكَلِّمِينَ. So, qiyam bidhat عِنْدَ الْفَلَاسِفَةِ has a different meaning than qiyam bidhat عند المتكلمين. He says ومعنى قيامه بذاته عند المتكلمين أن يتحيز بنفسه غير تابع تحيزه لتحيز شيء آخر. So what does it mean يقوم بذاته? It means أن يتحيز. يتحيز means to occupy space. It takes up space. It takes up space. Takes up space might not be the best way to say this, because the jawahir, the particles, I think they only have a location, they don't take up space. So what's meant by tahayyuz here, he says, it is to have a location. To have a location. So something that is mutahayyiz is something that has a location. So he says that to the commentators, that's why they say that its tahayyuz is accepting al-ishara al-hissiyya. It means you can point at it. That means it has a location. So he says here that معنى قيامه بذاته عند المتكلمين أن يتحيز بنفسه, that it independently has a location. غير تابع تحيزه لتحيز شيء آخر. This is a hal, meaning that while it and it's just, the hal is just explaining what it means to have tahayyuz bi nafsihi. It means that its tahayyuz is not tabi' to the tahayyuz of something else. Tabi' to, yani secondary to, subordinate to, secondary. It has a location intrinsically, not because of something else. He says بخلاف العرض فإن تحيزه تابع لتحيز الجوهر الذي هو موضوعه. موضوع means locus. So what do they see? The example, they'll give something like color. So they'll say color is a arad. So color is a arad, and the color, it inheres, it subsists in a locus. So blueness is an attribute, and this attribute of blueness subsists in a thing, let's say a book that is blue. So there's the book itself, and then there's its blueness, and we can change the color. The colors of things can change, but the things themselves remain the same. And that's where the Mutakallimun, they get this idea of jism and arad from, or ayn and arad from. They see that things change. So when things change, we see that the same thing has different colors. The same thing moves at different speeds. The same thing, it's of different lengths. So when you were a child, you were a lot shorter than you are now. So your attributes changed, your properties changed, but your identity did not change. You're the same person. So since we perceive identity and we see the thing is the same, even though its properties are changing, they said that the thing that gives an object its identity is the fact that it's ayn, it's the same thing. And the properties, they are secondary. So they come and go, but the thing doesn't change. So he said. So the ayn is the thing that independently occupies space, and the arad, its tahayyuz, its occupation of space, is secondary to the tahayyuz of the jawhar. Jawhar here, it doesn't mean particle; it means ayn. It's secondary to the location of the jawhar, which is its locus. So a arad has a locus, which means that a arad cannot exist independently of the ayn that it is a arad of. So blueness, there's always something that is blue. Blueness doesn't walk around independently. So blue needs a locus, it needs a mawdu'. He says هو موضوعه أي محله الذي يقومه. الذي هو يقومه. يقومه means it makes it قائم. What does it mean? It makes it قائم. It means that it, I think he's going to explain it here. يقومه. يقومه. It means that it gives it a location. So the ayn gives its properties a location. Why are the Mutakallimun talking in terms of location? Well, the reason they're talking in terms of location is because they don't believe in the existence of non-physical objects. So they're just talking about the things in the universe. So if you just look here, so the universe, according to the Mutakallimun, is composed of a'yan and a'rad. And a'yan are physical objects. They're things that occupy space. And a'rad are properties of those physical objects. As for mujarradat, most of the Mutakallimun, they said that they don't exist. And so the having a location is a necessary property of everything in the universe. And then the ayn is divided into jism or jawhar. So since they're talking about the universe and they believe that the universe is entirely composed of physical objects, that's why they're using location to define an object and a property. So he says ومعنى وجود العرض في الموضوع هو أن وجوده في نفسه هو وجوده في الموضوع. So what does it mean that a arad exists in a mawdu', in a locus? It means that وجوده في نفسه هو وجوده في الموضوع. Meaning that it doesn't have any independent existence separate from the jism. So one philosophical term for this is subsistence. So things can exist or they can subsist. Exist, it means they independently exist. Subsist means they have a they exist through the by virtue of the first thing. They have a dependent existence. وجود العرض في الموضوع, the arad's existing in the locus, blueness, the existence of the blueness in the book, هو أن وجوده في نفسه هو وجوده في الموضوع. What does it mean? It means that its existence, its own existence is the same thing as its existence in the mawdu'. What does it mean it's the same thing? It means that they're always found together. If it exists in the mawdu'. He says وَلِهَذَا يَمْتَنِعُ الْإِنْتِقَالُ عَنْهُ. So this is part of their pre-modern science. So they posited these things called properties, and they said that properties are not transferred from one thing to another thing. They're not transferred. So when one thing is blue and there's something else that's blue, and something else that becomes blue, it's its own blueness. The blueness of the first thing doesn't go into the second thing. Why not? Because in order for it to go into the second thing, it needs to come out of the object, first object, exist on its own in space, and then go into that next object. But it can't exist on its own. Therefore, it's impossible for a property to move from one thing to another thing. This is going to be part of their argument for the fact that the universe began to exist, because they're going to say that things change, and when things change, their properties are changing. The changing properties, they're actually going out of existence. And there's another property that's coming into existence, and nothing is being moved from one thing into another thing. And so they're going to say this is the proof that the properties, they began to exist. And I want you to see that this proof is based on their conception of the universe. It's based on their scientific understanding of the universe. It only works if you accept their understanding of the universe. If you conceive of the universe in a different way, then the proof in this way is not going to apply to you. He says, وَلِهَذَا يَمْتَنِعُ الْإِنْتِقَالُ عَنْهُ بِخِلَافِ وُجُودِ الْجِسْمِ فِي الْحَيِّزِ. So there's وُجُودُ الْعَرَض فِي الْمَوْضُوعِ, a property existing in its locus. What does that mean? It means, it doesn't just mean that it exists at that location. It means that the locus gives it its existence. But wujud al-jism fil hayyiz is not the same thing. The hayyiz, the location, doesn't give the jism its existence. He says, فَإِنَّ وُجُودَهُ فِي نَفْسِهِ أَمْرٌ وَوُجُودُهُ فِي الْحَيِّزِ أَمْرٌ آخَرٌ. Its existence in and of itself is one thing, and its existence in a location is something else. Meaning that it can exist in one location, it can exist in another location, it can exist in another location. Unlike the property, it can only exist in the thing that it's the property of. He says, وَلِهَذَا يَنْتَقِلُ عَنْهُ. This is why a jism can move from one location to another location. Because وجوده في نفسه أمر ووجوده في الحيز أمر آخر. وعند الفلاسفة. So we're going to see what the Falasifa say. What about the scientists? Well, for now it's not important. We're going to look at scientists in greater detail in the next lesson when we talk about atomism. But I want you to keep in mind right now that the arguments that we're going to see of the Mutakallimun and the Falasifa, they're theoretical, they're abstract, they're not based on empirical evidence. They're not based on conducting an experiment and looking at the results. They're but rather they're based on observation and reflecting on simple observation of things in the universe. There's probably some experimentation there, but the experimental evidence, empirical evidence, scientific reasoning, it plays a much greater role in our understanding of what the universe is than in science than it did in the past. So عند الفلاسفة معنى قيام الشيء بذاته استغناؤه عن محل يقومه، ومعنى قيامه بشيء آخر اختصاصه به بحيث يصير الأول نعتا والثاني منعوتا، سواء كان متحيزا كما في سواد الجسم أو لا كما في صفات الله تعالى والمجردات. So this is the key thing, this is the key difference between the definition of the Falasifa and the definition of the Mutakallimun. The Mutakallimun, they defined objects and properties in terms of a physical universe in which everything occupies space. The Mutakallimun, they had their conception of the universe was different, because according to them, the universe and so the universe also consisted of mujarradat, and mujarradat, they don't have a location, but they might have a property, and so you have to define object and property in a different way. And they also included in their definition of ayn and arad, they also included Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his attributes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not even part of the universe. So they tried to give it a definition that is more inclusive. And so because of this, they said that عند الفلاسفة معنى قيام الشيء بذاته. What does it mean that something it has independent existence? It means استغناؤه عن محل يقومه. It doesn't need a mahal. It doesn't need a locus to make it exist. It doesn't need a locus to make it exist. Not give it a location, but to make it exist. ومعنى قيامه بشيء آخر اختصاصه به. What does it mean that it subsists in something else? It means that it is اختصاصه به بحيث يصير الأول نعتا والثاني منعوتا. It means that it has an adjectival relationship. It has an adjective-like relationship. So when you say that something is blue, you say this is a blue book. What does it mean? What does it mean for a book to be blue? For blueness to subsist in the book? It means that it is ikhtisas. It is specific to, it's a property of the book in a way that the blueness is an adjective and the book is something that is described. It's kind of a general ambiguous thing. You say, what does that mean? And is it exact? Is it not exact? You can have a long discussion about it. We're not going to have a discussion about it because it's not useful, but just understand it at a high level. This is where they're going. He says, and then why does he say this? He says, سواء كان متحيزا كما في سواد الجسم, the blackness of a physical object, أو لا كما في صفات الله تعالى والمجردات. So this is a high level overview of the universe according to the Falasifa, the Mutakallimun, and science, modern scientists in our times. So we'll stop here. In the next lesson, we're going to look at atomism and the atomism of the Mutakallimun and compare it slightly to the atomism of scientists in our time. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.